So Rinpoche appeared at the door, and I looked up, and he said, "I've come to see you. It's more convenient for me at this time of the night to walk around the stupa and come out. There's not many people." And he came in, he sat in front of me, and I explained to him that, "Rinpoche, I had completed this, and this as you requested. What should I do now?" And so he gave me some meditation teachings. And then he got up and he left. And so I spent the next couple of days following his instructions, about 3 days, and I made a list of questions, and I went and I visited him where he was, and this time I could see him, and I sat down and I talked to him about my concerns, and he nudged me this and nudged me that, and a little like that, sort of got me back on an even keel. And he said, you don't need to talk about this with me now anymore, so I'll see you soon. And a couple days later, I left Nepal and I flew to Australia to be with Mim and our little baby Lily.
Thank you, Wat, for sharing that story. It is truly amazing and inspiring. So I wanted to ask, after leaving Nepal and going to Australia, was that it? Have you been in Australia ever since?
So as I was saying, we left the East in 1981, and we came back to Australia. We had our daughter Lily, and then Mim and I had no money. We'd spent all our money. We were broke, so we started trying to rebuild money with a view to get back to the East. That was what drove us. So we were in Australia for 3 years, and at that time, I worked, she worked, and we had a business together, and we managed to save enough money, and we returned to Nepal in about 1983. Now, when we had lived there before, we lived, like broke hippie Dharma bums. This time we had a bit more money, so we looked around trying to find a nicer house. Now, the first house we lived in, we moved in, and after a short time, we found that Trinley Norbu had lived in that house, and we didn't know that. So we were fortunate to live in a house that Rinpoche had blessed. We lived there probably about 6 months, and then through a very good family friend, a friend of mine who I had known since the early 70s, a Tamang man by the name of Mani Lama, who is the grandson of the Chini Lama, and who is one of Nepal's most famous artists. He's a brilliant photographer, Mani, and he's contributed to films, and he's done exhibitions, and he just produced a brilliant book about the reconstruction of the Bodha Stupa after the earthquakes. And Mani's wife, Meredith, informed us that there was a really nice house in a Sherpa compound. And the compound was owned by Ang Babu, who was sort of a member of the Panchayat for Solokhumbu. So they were Sherpa people, they were Buddhist people. It was a very comfy house. So we moved into that house, and it was fantastic. We had a refrigerator, we had toilets, we had bought a motorbike. All of a sudden we were, it was like the new Raj by comparison. Anyway, Bodha was the same. Bodha was full of Buddhists, lamas, students of all nationalities, and then plus Nepali culture, Tibetan culture, people from all over the hills. It was bustling. One afternoon, as I was walking around the stupa, and I heard someone call out, "Ward," and I looked up, and there was my old friend, Eric Pema Kunzang, who I hadn't seen in 3 years, and who I had shared so much with before. And Eric and I, we had a big hug, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm married, and I'm living upstairs in Tulku Urgyen's Gompa, and I'm translating for Tulku Urgyen, and I'm translating for Chikanima Rinpoche." And he said, "I'm working on one books with my wife, Marcia, That's Marcia Binder-Schmidt, and she was the editor and director of Rangjung Yeshi Publications, which they had founded. So Eric said, I'd like to, talk to you about doing some work with me. And so then over the next couple years, off and on, in between doing other things, Mim and I worked as an editor for Eric for Rangjung Yeshi Publications. And we were incredibly privileged to work with Eric and Marcia. The work that you cannot underestimate their contribution to the spread of Buddhism in the world, and especially among Western students. And I don't know how many books they've published by now, but it's probably 20, 25, maybe more. Sorry if I'm wrong. And Eric was scrupulous in his translating, and Marcia was brilliant in her management and distribution of these books, making them available to people. And it was just an honor to work with them. And we enjoyed that chapter in our lives very much. Anyway, back to the house. So we had a big, comfortable house. And as soon as our friends found out about that, they decided to come over and sleep there. So we had visitors, coming from here and there, from Australia. But we also had some really, really wonderful Tibetan and Himalayan visitors. Baka Rinpoche, he used to come, and Trinley Norbu introduced us to Rinpoche, and Rinpoche used to come, and Mim would give him English lessons, and then they would also work on translations, and Mim would edit his translations, and he was a regular visitor. Choji Tulku, Ladakh Choji Rinpoche, he would come, and he's a young fellow who I met at the Kala Chakra in India, and we had remained friends for all those years. And he was coming back and forth, and he was taking teachings from the Kempo at Dujum Rinpoche's Gompa, and doing pilgrimage. And he was there quite a lot. He would come and visit all the time. Another Jampal Dorje Rinpoche from Manali, who was the son of Appo Rinpoche, he came and visited us many times. I was giving him English lessons. And then Trinley Norbu would drop in every once in a while and surprise us, or he would send somebody to surprise us and to tell us to come up to his house. Now, the part that I should have said from the very beginning is that by now, Trinley Norbu had built his own house. And this house was built by Nepali laborers, of course, but a man by the name of Enrique Estrada, an American man from Texas, was sort of the foreman, and he worked for years on this house. And it was almost like a Milarepa story, where he built this house for his master. And he did a great job, and it was a very unique, interesting house, red brick house with lots of platforms and lots of light, and Rinpoche had designed it, and it was a great house. And that was only about a 10-minute walk from our house. And we ended up staying, this time, we ended up staying in Nepal for 7 years. And for probably 4 of those years, Trinley Norbu was in residence. So we went up for monthly pujas, sometimes twice a month for pujas, and we went up to visit. And Mim worked in the garden with our good friend Phoebe, and she spent hours up there with Rinpoche. And when I look back on it, the access that we had to Rinpoche was just, you think of it now, it was amazing how generous he was with his time, and how kind he was to us. The other thing is his family was often there. So Jamyang, I should say, Sangyum Rinpoche, she was there often, and the children. So the eldest daughter, Kilsang, she wasn't there a lot, but we did meet her a couple times. But Yeshi Palzam, Pema Tulku Urgyen were there, and then the 3 Tulku brothers would come from time to time. And one of the most memorable visits was when Zonsar Khenzi came and stayed, and then Dengo Chenzi came and visited. And so we were there, and with the 2 Chenzis, Trinley Norbu and the family. And I mean, what can I say? And Garab Rinpoche came to visit there, a young, slender, handsome Garab. You're still handsome, Rinpoche, don't get me wrong. And of course, young Jompo Dorje. He was there, and he was in robes. And I have a beautiful picture of him with his father taken on the porch. But, you know, we walked in and out of the kitchen. Every time we walked in the kitchen, Sang Yumla would say, would you like some tea? Would you like something to eat? Sit down, and we'd have afternoon tea. Stay for dinner, we'd have dinner. You know, they just opened the doors to the family life, and we saw the interactions of this amazing family, really amazing, as you all know. One of the other highlights was Rinpoche's impromptu visits, or his impromptu requests. It would happen any time of the day or night. And one time, in the front of Rinpoche's property, there was a small house, and Jamyang, the Thangka painter, lived there. And Jamyang would run and get us and say, Rinpoche needs you, you know. So he'd say, bring the motorcycle. So I'd show up in the motorcycle, and Rinpoche would come out, and he'd climb on the back and give me instructions. We'd drive around the Kathmandu Valley, taking him here and there. And that way he could avoid taxis and he could avoid the crowds. Because, of course, if Rinpoche went near the Bodha Stupa, many people would come and ask for blessings, of course. And he was generous, and of course he would give them. But sometimes, you know, he had some downtime, and we'd whiz around. And those were some really memorable moments. And then oftentimes someone would come and get us and say, Rinpoche says, come to the house. We'd go to the house. He'd have 2 or 3 taxi cabs waiting. We'd pile in the taxi cabs, and we'd go off to Parping, Tsopema, or we'd go to Swayambhu. And, you know, sometimes after the pilgrimage visits, he'd take everybody shopping. So we'd walk down Asan Toll, or we'd walk into the new bazaars, and he'd look at material and things like that. It was just everyday activities with an enlightened person. And the contrast of his presence with ordinary life was just such a brilliant teaching, and the way he cruised through everything. And I can't emphasize how much those teachings meant, because they were just right there, right at the moment. They were crystal clear mind teachings, and they were also teachings on conduct and decorum and the activities of a bodhisattva. Really remarkable times. And I look back on those with great fondness. So after a little while, we moved out of our Sherpa compound, because the Sherpas who owned it wanted it back. And funnily enough, they turned it into a gambling casino. So all the Sherpas would go there and they'd play show, but for big money. I mean, seriously, some of the pots were, you know, thousands of dollars. So we moved up the road to another house. It was a nice house, and but it was owned by the family of a opposition politician. So the revolution came. And I can't remember exactly what year that was, late 80s. And Rinpoche, Trinley Rinpoche called us in, and he said, you should leave. So we made arrangements to fly to Bangkok. And just before we left, we had a visit from our old friends in Manali, Khandro Trinley Chodron, Imi Drupten, who was Apo Rinpoche's Vajra brother and attendant, and I forget who else was in that party. Annie Ongzom, maybe, I'm not really sure, but there were 3 or 4, and they were looking for a place to stay. So we said, here, you take our house, and we'll go, because they weren't in any danger, and I believe they were protected anyway, because of really who they were. And so we went off to Thailand for the revolution, and we left Trinley Chodron and her family, and they were in our house. When we came back, of course, everything was fine. Then it came time to leave Nepal, and we had been having a lot of visa problems. So we very reluctantly packed up. We made a trip back to Australia as a fact-finding mission to see how things were. And then we came back to Nepal and we made the decision to leave. And we said goodbye, and we left in 1991. So altogether, I think I was in India, Nepal, and Southeast Asia for 18 or 19 years. And that was pretty much my spiritual journey in the East.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. That was truly amazing. I'm sure people watching will be really inspired to hear your story. Moving forward to the next question. Have you got any other memorable experiences with the Buddhist masters you've met and encountered?
You know, all of it. But if I really have to think of some, I've actually given it some thought, and I can probably narrow it down to a handful of the most amazing things that I remember. Okay. One of them was when we were in Rumtek with His Holiness Karmapa, and we had to extend our visa because we were able to stay longer because His Holiness was busy with attending with the Queen Mother of Bhutan and the princesses who were visiting him. But after that was over, we had an audience with His Holiness, and he took us upstairs in Rumtek Monastery into a room where he kept some of the relics that he had brought from Tibet. Most people know that His Holiness Karmapa was well aware of what the Chinese were up to, and had actually warned many people about leaving. And because His Holiness was omniscient and he knew what was about to happen, he managed to get some really priceless relics out of Tsurphu Monastery in Tibet and over into Indian territory. And he gave us a personal tour. There were about 3 or 4 of us, and he took us around, and he showed us tonkas that he had smuggled out of, I shouldn't say smuggled, that he had taken with him. They were his, out of Tibet, magnificent tonkas. And some of them had been rolled up, and they'd rolled up inside of carpets and put on the back of horses so that you'd thought they were carpets. But he showed us some incredible relics. He showed us a Tara statue that was covered in rinsel, pearls. And even if the pearls were collected, they would reappear. I didn't see them reappearing, but I did see the statue and the pearls. He showed us statues of the Kama Kagyu lineage. So Dorje Chung, Tilo Naro, Marpa, Mila, Gampopa, and the first Karmapa Dusum Kempa. And each statue was carved out of one rhino horn, one horn from a rhinoceros. Now I know that environmentalists would reel back in horror, but this was a different time when these were done. They were individually incredibly beautiful. But that was all fine. What was remarkable was being in the presence of a being who was, in my meager estimation, so clear, so calm, so in the present moment. And when he looked you in the eye, you automatically came into that realm with him, or you were there. It was mind instruction, complete transference of the state of shunyata, whatever you want to call it. Being around His Holiness was an immensely powerful experience. He was such a remarkable master. Let's see, another time I was doing retreat at the Bodha Stupa, and I was in a very small room upstairs in a Sherpa house, and it had a back veranda that looked out over the paddy fields. And it was the front of the house was right on the Kora. So I had been doing retreat up there. And at the time I was doing these retreats under the auspices of Trungpa Tulku. He was teaching me. And so Rinpoche would come and he would put me in retreat, and then he would shut the door and you'd go away. And then when the retreat was over, we had a designated time, 1, 2, 3 months, whatever. He would come back. We would sit together and he would do puja. So I was coming to the end of my retreat, and I put a note underneath the door, and the Sherpa lady who was serving my retreat, giving me food and things, she took the note and she gave it to my trusty messenger, none other than Mad Monk. And any foreigners, any Westerners out there may know the renowned Mad Monk. And so he took the message to Trungpa Rinpoche, and Trungpa Rinpoche's attendant said, Rinpoche is out of town at the moment. So Mad Monk went and he got another Lama. So I finished my retreat and I was waiting, and there was a knock at the door, and I opened the door, and there was Dabzang Rinpoche from the Kagyu Gompa standing there, one of the mightiest, most wonderful lamas that you'll ever meet. And Dabzang Rinpoche came in and he plopped down on the floor next to my meditation cushion, and we sat, and he looked around and he said, this is a very good room for retreat. And I said, really, Rinpoche? And he said, yep. He said, I did a 3-year retreat in this room. Yeah. So more blessings. Then we did puja together, and we left, and I went out, and I think I broke my retreat by drinking a liter of chang or something really, really spiritual. Let's see. So we were about to leave Nepal. We had a couple weeks before we were leaving, and Eric Pema Kunzang and I were together, and he said, would you like an audience with Tulku Urgyen before you leave? And I said, of course we would. So Mim, my wife, and our daughter Lily, and our son Joe, all went to visit Tulku Urgyen. And we sat down, and Tulku Urgyen gave a little talk about the impermanence of, coming and going and this sort of things. And then he gave us pointing out instructions, Dzogchen pointing out instructions from Tulku Urgyen. Now, Rinpoche is renowned for his direct style and his ease. He makes it look so simple. It makes you feel that enlightenment is there. It's just you just reach out and it's there. It permeates the room when you're around him. Well, of course, that's because he's such a wonderful master. And he does this in a number of ways. He did this in 2 different ways when we were there. He talks to you, he gives you the instruction. I won't even attempt to give them, of course, because it's not my place. But he gives the instruction, and then he just turns his hand, and then he turns it back. And while he's doing this, it's like he's taking you from ordinary mind to extraordinary. He's just opens the door. So he did that twice, and then in the end, he picked up I think it was a red geranium or a chrysanthemum or something, and he just held it up as he gave the instruction, and your attention goes to that. And in that way, he plants the seeds. So for that long, you're enlightened. Unfortunately, it goes away, but the seeds are there. I didn't describe this very well. Anyone who has had pointing out instructions through Tulku Urgyen will know what I'm talking about. It is a tremendously powerful, moving experience. It's something else from one of the greatest masters. When Dudjom Rinpoche passed away, I think it was 1987, he was in France, he passed away. There are many stories and legends surrounding that event. And ultimately, his body, his kudung, was returned to Nepal. And it flew and land. The plane flew into Kathmandu, and the kudung was greeted at the airport by many of us, thousands of people, and put on the top of an elephant in a beautiful little palanquin with a roof, a golden roof, and brocade sides, and they put it in there, and the elephant walked from the Kathmandu airport to Dudjom Rinpoche's Gompa in Bodhanath, and thousands of people lined the streets and walked with the kudung to bring it home. That was something else, really. Again, words can't describe that, but yeah, I'll remember that forever. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wat. It was like I was living in that story when you were reciting it. I was feeling all the emotions, the excitement. That was amazing.
But I did want to add one thing to that list of really special experiences. Sorry, I'm a bit emotional myself. In 2019 or 2020, Jambal Dorje Rinpoche came to Australia, and he brought 4 of the kids from Kunso Getzel in New York. He brought Chini Rangdo, Pema Drime, Sukha City, and Sangye Chudun. And these 4, I shouldn't call them children because they were young adults. These young people, they are umzes, they are chopans, they know all the dances, all the mudras, all the ritual. They have studied. They are like, well, I wouldn't say they are Kempos because they would be embarrassed for me to say that, but they are amazing. So they came to stay in Canberra, and they were there for about, I don't remember now, a couple weeks, maybe more. And we had 3 or 4 major assemblies and for the public, and the Bhutanese community came out in force, and we just had the most wonderful time. And that was the first time that I realized that I did have a Sangha here in Australia. Well, I knew I had some old members like Phoebe and Grit and people who I had known over the years. But this made me realize that a much wider Sangha was here in Australia. And I also wanted to say that this time around, not so long ago, Jambal Dorje Rinpoche came back to Australia to preside over the funeral of Phoebe's husband, Jean-Paul. And Rinpoche has stayed on since then. And he came here to our house and he stayed for a while. And during that time, we printed prayer flags and we put them up on the hill. And Rinpoche invited many of the Dudjom Tersar students from Brisbane who came, and Khenpo Milarepa and Khenpo Sangye Oncho, and many of the people who belong to the Dudjom Dharma House, Sonam and Samten, and many other practitioners came up. And we consecrated the prayer flags, and we did Riwo Sangsho up on the hill, and smoke offering, fire puja, and it was just the most wonderful day. And I said to him afterwards, I said, we've been here in Australia for 35 years or 30 plus years. And I said, and we waited and waited, and it was all worth waiting for. And again, what happened at that time is we made more bonds with our Bhutanese friends. And I mean, some of the people, their families have been 3 generations of Dudjom Tersar practitioners, It's an honor to meet these people. and to share Dharma with them, and all under the umbrella of Jompo Dorji Rinpoche, the grandson of my root guru, Dorji Rinpoche. And for all that to come together, well, I couldn't be happier. Oh, thank you to the Bhutanese community for making that happen.
Moving to the last question. How has Buddhism changed the way you see and live your everyday life?
Well, I mean, that's very difficult. I mean, my initial reply would be, well, I'm still an idiot, but at least I'm a little more aware of that. How has it changed? I believe that it's something that was really in some ways out of my control. And now I feel that I'm almost like in a stream, and that has taken me to amazing places, to meet amazing people, and to try and change my conduct and my outlook, and hopefully benefit other beings. Whether that's manifest, I'm not sure.
Thank you so much, Ward, for taking the time to share your story and taking us through your rich experience. It was
You're
like
welcome.
it was like we were living in that moment. And thank you so much for being here on Himalayan Tales. And thank you for willing to let us share your story with everyone. I'm sure everyone will be feeling very inspired. It was just an amazing experience getting to listen to your story. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
As we come to the end of this third and final part, we reflect on the remarkable journey of Ward, a man of Western origin who made Australia his home, yet devoted 18 years of his life in the Himalayan regions of the East. Under the guidance of many great masters, he immersed himself deeply in the study and practice of the Buddha Dharma, allowing those teachings to shape not only his understanding but his way of life. Through this series, we hoped to offer a small glimpse into the journey, one that bridges cultures, traditions, and generations, and reminds us that Dharma transcends borders and backgrounds. This may be the conclusion of this three-part series, but it is not the end of our work. We look forward to continuing to share more stories like this, stories of practice, devotion, and lived wisdom in the times to come. Thank you for watching, for reflecting with us, and for being part of this journey.
Sing da la be be